Malawi troops are patrolling major cities Friday after anti-government protesters clashed with police this week, leaving a reported 18 people dead. President Mutharika appealed for calm during nationwide radio address Thursday. Mr. Mutharika says he is willing to sit down and talk with his critics. Meanwhile, violent protests erupted Wednesday in the country's three largest cities, Blantyre, Mzuzu, and the capital, Lilongwe. Witnesses say rioters looted shops and set fires during the protests and that police fired tear gas. The United States and Britain have condemned the use of force by President Mutharika's security forces. Demonstrators are protesting fuel shortages, rising prices, and eroding civil liberties in the southern African country. And during this week's violent anti-government protests, there have been a heavy police presence on the streets of major cities, but protesters have been undeterred. The normally peaceful citizens of the landlocked country of Malawi have been protesting in several cities this week, demanding the resignation of their president, Mutharika. They accuse him of ignoring civil liberties and trashing the economy. Hundreds of demonstrators carrying banners and singing anti-Mutharika slogans are so far refusing to cave in to police orders to end their demonstrations.
Why aren't they reasonable? If they allow us to march, we will be very reasonable.
I thought we were marching here.
No, we're not marching. And the more we stay here, the worse it's going to get. So I refuse until we get the order to march.
Witnesses in the southern African country's capital, Lilongwe, reported seeing smoke billowing into the sky as protesters torched cars, offices and shops belonging to the ministers and politicians from Mutharika's ruling Democratic Progressive Party. Malawi is one of the poorest nations in Africa, with half its population of about 13 million living in poverty. The country is undergoing a severe fuel and energy shortage. In 2006, the government embarked on a 5-year plan to reduce poverty and grow the economy, but poverty remains high.
Well, I think the suggested solution is that every Malawian now must stand up and be heard because this country is going downhill. This country is for all of us, and all of us have got a duty right now to stop this downslide. We can't wait until 2014. We've got to speak, and the time is now for everybody to stand up and speak and say that this government is failing to live up to its obligations.
Demonstrators in the commercial capital, Blantyre, defiant against a court order banning their protest outside the stock exchange, faced police tear gas. But organizer Ken Williams Mango says police, despite their brutality, are also feeling the economic pinch.
Sometimes police have also come to demonstrate. They have problems. We've been hearing sometimes that a month have passed without their salaries. So maybe they also have their own grievances to present. So I'm happy.
In an effort to restore peace, President Mutharika, who was re-elected in 2009, has appealed to the crowds to stop their demonstrations and hold dialogue. For more perspective on this week's events in Malawi, we are pleased to be joined by Mwiza Munthali, Public Outreach Director for TransAfrica Forum. TransAfrica Forum is the oldest and largest African-American human rights and social justice advocacy organization. It promotes diversity and equity in the foreign policy arena and justice for the African world. Mr. Munthali, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Ndimyake.
Now, what do you make of the current demonstrations taking place in Malawi? You know, there's been a famine in the country. It didn't spark this kind of outrage. Now, ahead of the fuel and other shortages, people out in the streets, which is not very common.
Yeah, you mentioned the famine, which was early on in 2002.
Yes. And
I think part of it is a lot of frustration from people. There's a lot of frustration from the general society. This year, the fuel has been very scarce. Prices are very high. And then there's also one of the problems that we see with the government, and especially in the president, has been this. There seemed to be a sense of trying to amass a lot of powers, and so it's a buildup of many things. Mm-hmm. It's not just one thing, and maybe some people are also getting some some inspiration from what happened to the north of the country. Yeah, to the north of the continent. So that's another part of it.
I'm sure a lot of people, the last place they expected this would, play out is in Malawi.
Well,
but but moving on to the issues at hand, these protesters are calling for Mr. Mutharika's resignation. How valid are the arguments that, for one, he's been constricting the civil liberty space and also stifling the economy, and that he's an autocrat?
A lot of the arguments that they make have a point and are very valid. You've had just recently in Parliament, they passed this injunction bill, and which even members of his own party, actually the person who was in the subcommittee for judiciary who was pushing the bill, he even abstained voting for it because he thought it was not in the best interest of the country, and which would limit people questioning their leaders in the country, and particularly the presidents and the executive branch. And it's funny because when he had a minority government, when he came to power in 2004, it's because of an injunction that stalled the impeachment proceedings against him. So it's funny that now he's trying to amend that law to benefit the power, his personal power. So, and then there's also a lot of there's been a lot of problems. For instance, we talking about the president and how he seems to be wanting to be controlling everything. He and his vice president have split. They've actually removed the vice president from the party. She was expelled because they felt that she had acted against the state. But there's no evidence. There's no judicial proceedings. Just hearsay. It's not done in a court of law, and which is really unprecedented, where you have a vice president, president at loggerheads.
Now, just to touch on the issue that has caused people to come out in the streets, this issue of shortages. We know that United Kingdom pulled out some of the aid, or it's holding out some of its aid because of Mr. Mutharika's call to expel one of its representatives over his criticisms that he was an autocrat. And Malawi is a very aid-dependent country. Are these the impacts now of this fuel shortage and other crises? The
fuel shortage was there before the expulsion. And now even the government is trying to use that as an excuse that they're trying to explain away to the public that the reason why you don't have certain things is because we don't have the aid. It's true that the country relies heavily on foreign aid, and that's the more reason why when you're expelling another person, you should have some discussion within the system. The way it was done was very haphazard. The president himself took the issue instead of having the foreign minister call the ambassador, and things like that. The things that people are talking about, that where the president seems to be trying to be all things and everything,
which is very interesting for a person who was a World Bank economist, and he came in, a lot of people thought, as a reformer. But we'll have to continue this conversation another day. But thank you so much for coming in to give us that update. That's Mwiza Munthali, Public Outreach Director for TransAfrica Forum, joining us here on In Focus.